committee work, and I just
I
want
know.
Senator Grassley, welcome.
She's better looking than I am. I can understand why you said that.
Senator Grassley, I actually was not trying to avoid you. As an Iowan, you and Secretary Vilsack, I know, go back a long way.
Yeah. Say, I'm going to start out with my favorite subject every time we have a farm bill up on farm payment limitations. In your testimony, you mentioned that if we keep the agriculture policy status quo, we will continue to see consolidation. You said, quote, unquote, it is either get big or get out, and I agree with what you said there. My long-held belief is that farm policy should be limited to safety net that helps farmers weather the storm of natural disasters and unpredictable commodity markets or politics or international trade getting involved. Current law goes well beyond that. In the 2018 Farm Bill was intentionally written to help the largest farmers receive sometimes millions of dollars of subsidy from the federal government each year. You've heard the figure of 10% of the biggest farmers getting 70% of the benefits out of the farm program. Not only to you, Mr. Secretary, but to the members of this committee, I'm asking that you now work with me to stop this needless abuse of taxpayers' dollars. I support farmers only receiving commodity payments if they're actively engaged in farming. And for the Republicans on this committee, I think some, or maybe all of us, are working to tighten work requirements for SNAP recipients. I hope that we would also look at work requirements in Title I of the Farm Bill to make sure that people are actively engaged in the process of farming if they're going to benefit from it. Now back to you, Mr. Secretary. In prior administration, Secretary Perdue issued a final rule where the payment recipient must provide either 25% of the farm's total management hours on an annual basis or perform at least 500 hours of management annually. But after the election in 2020, USDA issued a correction to that rule, and the correction that I believe went against congressional intent. So to you, Secretary, when there's discussions about helping the many rather than the few, have you studied if having actual payment limitations could help prevent the big from getting bigger?
Senator, I think there need to be realistic and reasonable limits. We recently had a initiative involving rice producers that are going to receive $250 million of assistance and help, understandably and appropriately. It's interesting the way that we've set the way that was set up. There's a payment limit that if more than 75% of your income comes from farming, you get $125,000. I got to make sure I get this right. Now, if less than 75% of your income comes from farming, you get $125,000. If more than 75% of your income comes from farming, you get $250,000. Now, when you take a look at the way in which 90% of farmers are, most of them are not making the majority of their money from farming. So the small and mid-sized producer doesn't get as much help as a larger producer. And I understand large producers have significant capital expenditures, but it's interesting that the structure of that particular program it makes it more difficult for the small and mid-sized guy to get the kind of help that they need to stay in business. So as you look at these payment limits, we really need to understand and figure out how do we do this in a way that recognizes the capital contribution of large producers, but at the same time understands and appreciates that they may be in a better position to withstand a shock than the small and mid-sized person who's just on the edge every single year. It's tough.
My last question along that line is, is it philosophically possible for you and/or the administration to work with us to try to find some payment limitations so that we're helping the medium and small-sized farmers as opposed to subsidizing the big farmers, the big farmers to get bigger?
The key here, I think, Senator, is to figure out ways in which we can help those small and mid-sized producers in a meaningful way. I think not only is it safety net, but it's also market development. I think we have to create more income opportunities for those producers. I don't think that they are necessarily going to be able to compete successfully in a commodity-based market. If that's the only option they have, they've got to have other ways to make money from that farming operation in order for them to stay in business.
Okay. Now, I think you already had a question from another member about the Commodity Credit Corporation. Before I ask this, have to be my last question. I probably need to confess that when President Trump did some what I consider misuse of the Commodity Credit Corporation, I didn't ask any questions about it at that time. But when Congress is discussing Farm Bill reauthorizations, we have to work together in a bipartisan manner to create new programs and then work through the appropriation process to get them funded. However, since 2017, the USDA, through the Commodity Credit Corporation, has spent $65 billion in spending on priority set at the discretion of the department and not Congress. That means that Congress has elected representatives of the American taxpayer, did not go through the painstaking back and forth and compromising on how these programs will operate and how much or how little the program should need. So it's my belief that the USDA's discretionary use of CCC undercuts this committee farm bill process. This farm bill will not be a success unless Congress takes back our responsibilities of setting the nation's farm program. So are you in a process of creating any new programs through the Commodity Credit Corporation while Congress is negotiating the farm bills? In other words, I guess I'm asking you to look ahead maybe 6 to 9 months while we're working on this bill.
Well, I think there's always the utilization of the CCC to assist food banks that are challenged in order to meet the increased demand for food for struggling families. That sometimes is a way in which the CCC fund is used. There are times when we obviously use it for things like the fertilizer initiative, where we're trying to help farmers get lower cost inputs. I will say, Senator, you used a $63 billion number. I would imagine that nearly 90% of that number came from the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And so what we've done with that resource, the biggest decision we made was reference to the Climate Smart Partnership Initiative. And I will remind you that farm groups, major farm groups, virtually every commodity group, wanted this program to be set up and basically outlined how it should be set up, which we followed to a T, and then they said fund it through the CCC. And we did it within the context of the law. This is not when you say discretionary, it's not like I can invent something. I got to stay within the context and the language of the CCC charter, and we've done that, and we will continue to do that. And the difference between the way we're doing this and the way the Trump administration, we will never put at risk the farm bill programs. That's what happened before. They basically drained the account, and then you all had to fill it back up again. We're never going to do that. Ever going to do that. That is not what we're going to do. So we're going to be judicious about this. We're going to stay within the charter, and we're never going to put those farm programs at risk.
You heard me confess that I didn't raise the same issue with the previous administration. Thank you, Madam Chairman.